Varath Prime Station had the quality of a place that had been the center of things for long enough that being the center was simply its condition. Not performed, not managed, simply the ambient fact of a structure that had been hosting the most consequential decisions in the explored galaxy for 60 years, and had developed, in the hosting, the specific gravity of accumulated significance. It was vast in the way of things built for a purpose that kept growing, expanded 3 times in 60 years, each expansion producing a new layer of architecture that sat alongside the previous layers with the specific quality of eras visible simultaneously. The oldest sections carrying the specific worn dignity of spaces where many important things had happened, and the newest sections carrying the specific purposeful quality of spaces being prepared for many more. The Grand Convergence met here every 4 years, 64 civilizations, their senior representatives in the same physical space for 5 days. The agenda items that had been negotiated for 18 months before the assembly convened, the positions that had been prepared with the full resources of 64 foreign services, the specific high-stakes diplomatic environment of a gathering where the outcomes would shape the next 4 years of interstellar relations, and every delegation present knew it. Sovereign Vale had been here twice before, once at 26, as the most junior member of the human delegation, present primarily to observe and carry documents, once at 30, as a senior analyst in support capacity, present to provide assessments that shaped others' decisions. This time he was 34, and he was carrying 3 of the 7 major agenda items himself, and the human delegation's formal positions on those items would be informed directly by his readings of the room. He read rooms the way some people read text, with the specific quality of attention that assembled meaning from the combination of components that individually said less than they said together. The formal statements and the informal postures, the official positions and the quality of how those positions were being held, the texture of what was being carefully said and the texture of what was being more carefully not said. He had been developing this capacity for 11 years, and he had arrived at the Grand Convergence with the specific quiet confidence of someone who knew their tools were good. The opening session had the quality of 64 civilizations' best institutional performances happening simultaneously. The formal statements, the strategic positioning, the specific careful calibration of displayed strength and displayed flexibility that each delegation's situation required. He read it with professional attention and the personal fascination that had made him good at this work in the first place, the genuine interest in the texture of things that no training produced and that training could only refine. The Sorvani delegation was positioned in the chamber's primary tier, the specific placement of one of the assembly's most significant participants, adjacent to the 3 other civilizations, whose positions most directly shaped the outcomes on the major agenda items. Sovereign Delegate Varath conducted the Empire's participation with the composed authority of someone who had been doing this at the highest level for 12 years and had developed, in the doing, the specific quality of someone for whom the room's significance was ambient rather than requiring active management. She was 41, long-tapered Sorvani ears, amber eyes with the quality of someone who had been paying careful attention to significant things for a long time and had arrived at the specific depth that long, careful attention produced. Her bearing had the quality of authority that was structural rather than performed, the authority of someone who had done the work that produced authority and was now simply present in it. He noted her in the professional register of the people in the room whose assessments would be worth understanding. He continued his work. The reception's outer edge had a quality he had learned at 30, the specific shelter from the events center that the architecture created, the place where the people who needed a moment away from the performance found each other and had, sometimes, the conversations that the performance precluded. She was there. He had not expected this. The Sovereign Delegate of the Sorvani Empire at a Grand Convergence reception was, in the normal functioning of the occasion, a person at the center of the event rather than at its edge. He revised the expectation with the specific quality of someone who had just received new information about a person and was updating their assessment. The Threnari delegation statement on frontier resource access, he said, by way of opening. The specific register of two analysts who had been in the same room reading the same things and who had found each other at the edge of an occasion and had established in the first exchange that the register was available. The third paragraph was the position. The first two were the preparation for the position. Most people are going to respond to the preparation. She looked at him with the quality of someone who had just had their assessment confirmed in a specific way. The Threnari always do that, she said. The rhetorical structure that produces the appearance of a moderate position by flanking the actual position with more extreme language. It works because the room responds to the flanking. She paused. You read it correctly. The Threnari response was interesting, he said. The Threnari response was a question disguised as a statement, she said. They want to know whether the Sorvani modification of the framework proposal is the Empire's actual position or a negotiating opening. She held his gaze with the direct quality of someone who had decided a conversation was worth being honest in. It is the actual position. He looked at her. That's a significant disclosure for a reception. You read the Threnari statement correctly in 30 seconds, she said. You are not going to misuse a straightforward answer to a diplomatic question. A pause. I assess people quickly. I have been doing it for 12 years. My assessments are accurate. How long did the assessment take? He said. The opening session, she said. You were in the support tier. You were reading the room rather than managing your delegation's presentation. The quality of the reading was visible to someone paying attention to the support tier rather than the formal statements. She paused with the dry precision of someone whose humor was the product of intelligence rather than performance. Most people do not pay attention to the support tier. Most people are watching the formal statements, he said. Which is why the formal statements are managed so carefully, she said. And why the support tier is where the actual analysis is. The reception continued around them. Neither of them was paying it their primary attention. The conversation developed with the quality he associated with the best professional exchanges, the specific quality of two people whose tools were similar and whose conclusions had been reached independently and who were finding the comparison genuinely productive. The assembly's actual dynamics versus its official dynamics. The Threnari position's real flexibility versus its stated rigidity. The two agenda items on which the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and the one on which it was not, and the question of which delegations understood the difference. He was good at this conversation. So was she. The combination was the specific quality of an exchange that was building something rather than exchanging things, each contribution advancing the analysis rather than merely adding to it. When the reception's internal dynamic eventually drew the attention of both their delegations and required their return to their respective official functions, the conversation paused with the quality of something that had been genuinely started rather than completed. He thought about it later, in the analyst's accommodation on the station's residential level, with the specific quality of a thought that was professional in its surface content and was also something else. The second-day plenary session, the full Grand Convergence in the main chamber, all 64 delegations at their formal positions, had the specific quality of a high-stakes diplomatic environment at its most concentrated. The Frontier Resource Allocation Framework was the third agenda item, and it was the one that mattered most to the most delegations, the one on which 4 major civilizations had incompatible positions, and the one on which the Assembly's outcome would determine the most. The human delegation seating position was adjacent to the Sorvani delegation section, a proximity produced by the seating arrangement's alphabetical logic, which placed human and Sorvani delegations in positions that shared an angle on the chamber. Soren was in the outermost position of the human delegation section, which placed him at the boundary of the space between the two delegations. He was aware of this proximity in the specific ambient way of someone who had been in the same professional orbit as another person for 2 days, and had arrived at the quality of awareness that proximity over time produced. He was conducting his analysis with the professional focus the session required, and he was also, in the specific background of his attention, aware of the Sorvani delegation section and the quality of its conduct. The Frontier Resource Framework discussion reached its critical passage at the session's third hour. The Threnari delegation's formal statement was delivered by their senior representative with the specific formal precision of something that had been prepared with legal exactitude and was being delivered with the intention of creating maximum strategic effect. It challenged the Sorvani Empire's proposed modification to the framework's frontier access provisions. Not directly, not confrontationally, but in the specific way of a diplomatic statement that created the conditions for a confrontation without technically initiating one. The challenge was in the third paragraph, framed as a question about implementation but functioning as a position assertion that required a response. The chamber waited. The specific suspended quality of a diplomatic chamber at the moment between a significant challenge and the response to it. The 64 delegations at full attention, the session's recorders running, the weight of the next several minutes visible in the quality of how the room was holding itself. He felt before he heard that something was happening in the adjacent section, the specific peripheral awareness of someone who was paying attention to the quality of a space and had registered a change in that quality. He did not turn. He continued looking at the chamber's center. He was aware, in the specific precise peripheral awareness of someone who was not looking at something but was receiving it fully, that Vareth had leaned forward slightly, not toward the chamber's center, toward the adjacent section, toward the boundary space where his position was. And then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but which carried in the chamber's specific acoustics with the quality of something said with complete precision, into a space that was already holding its breath. That one belongs to me. Standard, clear, the specific quality of a statement that was not performing anything, simply saying something true in the register of someone for whom saying true things was sufficient. The silence that followed was not the silence of a room that hadn't heard. It was the silence of 63 civilizations' senior representatives processing, simultaneously, what the sovereign delegate of the Sorvani Empire had just said, to whom she had said it, in what moment she had chosen to say it, and what the combination of those three things meant in the specific diplomatic grammar of the Grand Convergence. He felt the silence as a physical quality, the specific weight of a room's full attention arriving at a single point in the space that happened to be the point where he was sitting. He did not look at Vareth. He looked at the chamber's center with the composed attention of someone conducting their professional function, and found, in the conducting, the specific quality of someone who understood that the magnitude of a moment was not reduced by being still in it. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Vareth straightened in her seat, turned toward the chamber's center, and delivered the Sorvani Empire's formal response to the Threnari challenge. The specific, precise, authoritative response of the Empire's senior diplomatic architect addressing a significant diplomatic challenge with the full weight of 12 years of this work behind every word. The response was measured and complete and entirely sufficient. It also carried, in the quality of its delivery, something that had not been in the session before the silence, the specific weight of a room that had received information about the person delivering the statement and had recalibrated its understanding of the statement accordingly. The Threnari delegation's response to the Sorvani reply came 90 minutes later, after the session's procedural recess, and it carried the specific quality of a position that had been evaluated against new information about the landscape and had adjusted accordingly. Not a concession, not a capitulation. The specific careful adjustment, of a delegation that had just received a significant data point about the relative positions of the major players, and was recalibrating with the methodical thoroughness of a civilization that had been doing this for 400 years. 3 delegation members approached Sauron in the following sessions. The Varenthi representative, whose civilization's position on the frontier framework was adjacent to the human delegations, found him at the analyst consultation session the following morning with the specific quality of someone who wanted information, and had decided the most efficient route was direct inquiry. What was the nature of the relationship between the human senior analyst and the Sorvani sovereign delegate? He answered with the honest, direct quality that his professional formation had taught him was always the best tool. "I don't have that information," he said. "The statement was not addressed to me. Its meaning is not mine to interpret." The Varenthi representative received this with the quality of someone who had received a diplomatic statement and was now analyzing it. "The statement was very specifically addressed to you," she said. "The sovereign delegate would be the appropriate source for its interpretation," he said. This answer was itself a diplomatic statement. It was received as one. He watched it arrive in the Varenthi representative's assessment of the situation, and was accurate enough about what was in his own expression to understand that his answer had communicated something he had not entirely intended to communicate, which was that he was not in a position to interpret the statement, because the statement had not yet been explained to him. The other 2 approaches, from the Threnari cultural liaison and from the Keldrani junior delegate, had the same quality. He gave the same answer. The same information was communicated in the answering. He conducted his analysis for the remaining sessions with the professional focus that the work required, and the specific quality of someone who had something in the background of their attention that was waiting to be addressed, and which the work was, for the moment, the appropriate container for. The observation deck was on the station's uppermost public level, the specific space that the delegates used when they needed the perspective of the galaxy's actual scale against the intensity of 5 days of high-stakes diplomacy. He had come here at the previous 2 Grand Convergences for the same reason, the specific quality of the view, which was the view of everything that the assembly was about but which the assembly chamber's interior architecture prevented from being visible during the sessions. She found him there on the assembly's final evening. He had not arranged this. He had come to the observation deck because the observation deck was where he came at the Grand Convergence's end, and she had come because she had come, and the encounter had the quality of something that had been heading toward this point across 5 days and had arrived here naturally. She stood beside him at the viewport. The galaxy's scale was visible through the station's transparent hull, the specific deep, star-filled dark of the frontier's edge, the explored space ending here and the unexplored space beginning, the specific quality of a boundary that was also an invitation. "The assembly is going to produce the framework modification," he said. "The Threnari recalibration yesterday afternoon was the deciding variable." "Yes," she said. They were quiet for a moment with the comfortable quality of people who had established that silence between them was not a gap to be filled. "3 delegations asked me about the statement," he said. "I know," she said. "I had 2 parallel inquiries from delegation heads who wanted to understand what they had observed." "What did you tell them?" "The truth," she said, "which is the same thing I would tell you if you asked." He looked at the galaxy through the viewport, at the stars that the assembly was about, the 64 civilizations and their competing needs, and the specific ongoing work of keeping them in relation to each other rather than in conflict. "What is the truth?" he said. She was quiet for a moment with the quality of someone who has prepared a true thing and is delivering it with the care it deserves. "In Sorvani diplomatic culture," she said, "the phrase has a specific meaning. That one belongs to me. It is an assertion of personal claim in a context where personal claims are not usually made. It means, this person is under my protection. This person is in my sphere. Anyone who acts against this person acts against me." She paused. It is used rarely. It carries significant weight because it is used rarely. Why that moment? He said. The Threnari challenge had a secondary component, she said. Not in the formal statement, in the informal intelligence that preceded the session. There was a faction within the Threnari delegation that had identified the human senior analyst as a potential pressure point for the frontier framework discussion. The intention was to create a situation after the formal session in which your delegation's position would be complicated by your position being questioned. She held his gaze with the direct, steady quality of someone saying something that needed to be said directly. I became aware of this 2 hours before the session. I made a decision. He absorbed this. The specific quality of understanding something that had been done for him without his knowledge and without his being asked. You protected my position, he said. I protected you, she said. Your position was a secondary benefit. She paused. I want to be precise about that because precision matters between people who are honest with each other. He looked at her, at the composed authority and the steady amber eyes, and the 12 years of doing this work that had produced the quality of someone who had arrived at exactly who they were and was simply present in it. He looked at her with the full quality of his attention, the same attention that read rooms and read delegations and read the texture of things. And he found, in the reading, the confirmation of something he had been not quite naming for 5 days. The statement had an additional meaning, he said, not a question. Yes, she said, simply. Which delegations understood the additional meaning? All of them, she said, with the dry precision of her specific humor. Which is why the silence lasted 4 seconds. He was quiet for a moment. I would have appreciated being informed, he said, before the 64 delegations were. Yes, she said, you would have. That is a fair statement. She held his gaze. I made a rapid decision under time pressure and the sequencing was not ideal. A pause. I am not apologizing for the decision. I am acknowledging that the sequencing could have been better. That is a very diplomatic formulation, he said. I have been doing diplomacy for 12 years, she said. It is occasionally a limitation. He looked at the galaxy through the viewport, at the frontier's edge and the unexplored space beyond it, and the specific quality of a boundary that had been the context of his entire professional life. He thought about a whisper in a diplomatic chamber, and 63 civilizations, senior representatives, processing it simultaneously, and 4 seconds of silence that had carried more weight than most formal statements he had heard. What does belong to you mean, he said, in the non-diplomatic sense? She was quiet for the specific length of time that the question deserved. It means, she said, that I have been paying attention to you for 5 days and have arrived at conclusions that I would like the opportunity to determine are accurate over a longer period. She held his gaze with the specific directness of someone who had decided to say a true thing and was saying it completely. It means that I find you genuinely interesting in the way that I find very few people genuinely interesting, and that finding a person genuinely interesting is, in my experience, the beginning of something rather than a conclusion. Another pause. It means that when I understood that your position was being threatened, my first response was not diplomatic calculation, but something more immediate and less managed. And I am precise about that because precision matters. He looked at her in the observation decks quiet, with the galaxy visible behind her and the assemblies 5 days behind both of them. The frontier resource framework, he said. The modification that passes tomorrow. The human delegation's position on the secondary provisions. Yes, she said. Our positions are compatible, he said. The analysis I've been developing suggests they're more compatible than the official communications have acknowledged, which means there's work to do, the kind of work that benefits from ongoing contact between the delegation's senior analytical staff. She looked at him with the quality of someone who was reading a room with the full quality of her attention and finding it entirely legible. That is a very diplomatic formulation, she said. I have been doing analysis for 11 years, he said. it is occasionally useful. Her ears, the long tapered ears that had been at the composed neutral of 5 days of Grand Convergence diplomacy, moved to the full forward angle of the complete, genuine, unmanaged expression that he had learned across 5 days to recognize as the truest version of what she was feeling before the managed version arrived. The frontier provisions work, she said, would require several months of sustained collaboration, likely involving significant contact between the Sorvani diplomatic office and the human delegation's analytical division. That is my assessment as well, he said. We should begin immediately after the assembly concludes, she said. The timeline is important. The timeline, he said, is important. The assembly's final session produced the Frontier Resource Framework Agreement, the specific outcome that 5 days of Grand Convergence diplomacy had been building toward. The cooperative framework's frontier provisions for the next 4 years established with the signatures of the 64 civilizations' senior representatives. The formal record reflecting the outcomes that the sessions had produced. In the formal record, the agreement was noted with the procedural language of 60 years of Grand Convergence documentation. Precise, complete, entirely accurate about the official content of what had been decided. In the informal record, the record that lived in the 64 delegations' collective memory, in the private communications that senior representatives sent to their home civilizations, in the specific texture of what the assembly had produced beyond its documented outcomes, something else was noted. The sovereign delegate of the Sorvani Empire had said 4 words in a whisper during the most tense passage of the frontier framework discussion, and 63 civilizations' representatives had heard them, and the silence that followed had carried the weight of a room that had received significant information and was understanding its implications. The information was understood differently by different delegations, in the specific way that significant information was always understood differently by different people reading it from different positions. Some of them understood it as a diplomatic statement, a significant assertion of Sorvani influence, a public positioning that reshaped the understood relationships among the assembly's major players. Some of them understood it as something more personal, which was the more accurate understanding, and filed it in the category of things that were both diplomatically relevant and humanly real, and which the diplomatic record was not designed to capture, but which the actual record, the record of what had happened between people, contained completely. Soren completed his delegation responsibilities with the focused professional attention of someone doing their work correctly. He filed his final assessments. He participated in the human delegation's closing review. He produced the documentation that his role required. And in the evenings of the assembly's remaining days, in the specific informal spaces that the formal schedule left unfilled, he had the conversations that were not on the official record, the ongoing exchange with the Sorvani Sovereign Delegate that was both the beginning of the frontier provisions work and the beginning of the other thing. The two things proceeding simultaneously with the specific quality of a relationship that was both professional and personal, and which found, in the combination, that neither dimension reduced the other. The galaxy continued its specific ongoing existence outside the station's viewports, vast, indifferent to the assembly's outcomes in the way that vastness was indifferent, simply present in its scale around the specific human-sized events happening within it. He thought about 4 words said in a whisper. He thought about the 4 seconds of silence that followed. He thought about the precision of the person who had said them, the specific commitment to accuracy that said, "I protected you, not your position." I want to be precise about that because precision matters between people who are honest with each other. He thought about the frontier's edge visible through the observation deck's viewport, the explored space ending and the unexplored space beginning, and the specific quality of a boundary that was also an invitation. He thought about months of sustained collaboration, and the timeline being important, and the work that began immediately after the assembly concluded, which was already beginning, which was in fact already underway in the specific way that things that had been heading toward a point across 5 days were underway before either of the people they concerned had named them. Outside the station's hall, the galaxy held its silence. Inside, 64 civilizations were going home. Some things that had been decided were in the formal record. Some things that had been decided were in the people they had happened to. Both kinds of record were accurate. Both kinds were real.